we don't have to have all of the answers as a parent, but, knowing where to find them and reach out for help is excellent. Sleep should be something that feels enjoyable. Bedtime should be a memorable, comfortable, bonding moment.
Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Entering Motherhood, a podcast dedicated specifically to new moms going through this amazing journey in life. I'm your host, Sarah Bilger, a postpartum nutritional coach / mechanical engineer. And as always, I'm so excited to be here with you and share all of the information I've been lucky enough to obtain since becoming a mom. In this episode, we talk with Jennie Boone about improving sleep for our little ones and how it can not only help them, but improve our lives as the parents too. Welcome to Entering Motherhood, and I am so excited and happy to have you here and jump into all the knowledge that you can give us about, getting our kids to sleep and what you have learned and what helps. So how about you go ahead and start by introducing yourself and tell us what you do and how you kind of got there.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Jennie Boone, and I'm the founder of Tiny Duck Parenting. And I started off in college as a child and adolescent development major and loved everything that I was learning. And it just felt like a lot of it really came naturally to me. And from there, I worked in home with families privately, as a nanny, as a babysitter. I was a teacher for a while, so tutor, kind of all things working with children from essentially from birth until teenagers. So I had a really wide range of experience with a lot of different children, a lot of different families from, California to New York, and, sometimes in between. And I was working with a family as their nanny and realized, I was helping their child with sleep at the time. And I wanted to try to help more families at once because I wanted to make the impact bigger, and help more people because parenting is the absolute hardest job on the planet. You work so hard to give your child the very best of everything that you can, and you want to do everything right and everything, that you can to help them, to nurture them. And then on top of that, so many parents are also working parents and have office work to do, whether it's in the office or at home. So I really wanted to have the answers for families to go to for sleep because sleep is actually just as important as nutrition and water, especially for our children. During sleep is when our babies and our toddlers and children are making neurological connections. Their memory is developing. They're processing all of the beautiful information they learned throughout the day. So they really need sleep to solidify all of that information and process it. And so, I mean, we wouldn't if we have the means to feed our child consistently, we wouldn't purposely skip a meal, right? So sleep really should be treated in the same way. It's just as important. So I got really passionate about that. And as I was helping this family with their child's sleep, I was, reading and Googling and looking at books, and I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many different answers. One person tells you this, and another thing tells you this, and it's so confusing and disheartening and really stressful and honestly isolating too. So I wanted to be someone that could support parents as they support their child.
That's awesome. I can completely agree with, when you're Googling something or when you're searching for information, how it can be so overwhelming and all of this content is coming at you and you're just trying to find like a solution that works for you. You're just trying to find something that is going to relieve whatever kind of stress or overwhelmness feeling that is happening. And so I really feel like going to someone who has done all of that crazy back end work and is going to be there to support you directly through this process and be like, we got this. It's okay. Like, you're going to get there. Just having somebody to guide you through that is huge. And you don't feel like you're going through it alone when you have that support. So I definitely get what you mean. And even like asking friends and stuff like that, how I said, Rosie sleeps through the night. I have no idea what we did to get there. But I don't know even where I would begin to try to tell somebody like what they can do to help their child sleep, because I'd just be like, yeah, we did this, but who knows if that's going to work for them. And so like I feel like even talking to friends about that kind of thing can be frustrating and overwhelming, and you're going to get different perspectives every which way. So I guess, like, where do you start with a family?
Yeah. So, and that's so true what you said about asking friends. And, it's wonderful when moms and dads have that community around them of people that they can reach out to. But you're right. Sometimes, that experience that that family has is limited to their own children. So they can tell you what worked for their child, but they don't have the perspective to tell you, if this doesn't work, we need to do this. Or, look at it from a big picture. And sometimes, too, the age really matters when you're looking at sleep, especially when a child's an infant. The different months really make a humongous difference because there's so much that happens developmentally each month. So even asking a parent or a mom group on Facebook, or friends, or grandparents, you might not always get all of the information because they just don't necessarily have it, because they don't specialize in it. And so when I'm working with a family, I one of the first things I tell them is, every family is so different and every child is so different. So my husband falls asleep so easily. I toss and turn. It takes me the perfect environment. Everything has to be just right for me to go to sleep. Our children are the same way. They're so different. And then on top of that, there's different schedules. Some kids are at daycare, some are in home. There are siblings, new babies in the family, all sorts of things, different environments that they're in. So it's you really have to look at everything in the picture of sleep to get all of the answers of what to do, which is actually I started off working with families on potty training, behavioral issues, new sibling prep, all things like that. And I do still coach that. However, I kept finding that everything was starting with sleep. So, sleep was at the core of most of these other struggles. So, when I'm working with family, I will look at the whole picture. I want to hear the background. I want to hear, is your child considered to be neurotypical with your pediatrician? Is your child at, a percentage like of body weight that your pediatrician's comfortable with? Is your child a selective eater, or are they eating a solid dinner before bed? What how much sleep are they getting during the daytime? What are they doing during the daytime? Are they overstimulated, understimulated? So we look at that and we work on building their schedule. So I personally specialize mostly in ages 1 and up. There are wonderful consultants out there that specialize in infant sleep. I'm educated in that, but I specialize in older. However, it all starts with the same kind of base and questions. So, any sleep consultant that a family chooses to work with should be asking about, the day to day schedule, what the child's eating, what does their room look like? So that's something that, when I first start with a client, I have them send me a video of the room during the day. then close all the shades, shut the door, turn the lights out, and send me another little video, and we'll sit and analyze that video. So, something I like to do is I always say, let's eliminate all variables that we can control. So, we can control the room being dark and cool, and we can put in a sound machine to alleviate any outside of the room noise that's going on. That is something we control. For some kids that doesn't make that much of an impact, but for a lot of kids it does. So get that all squared away, so you don't have to worry, is the light coming in the morning impacting the early wake ups, or are they having trouble falling asleep because it's still, it's summer and the sun's still up, even though it's still bedtime. So making those room conditions comfortable, and then changing the schedule, because a lot of the times we actually are missing the sleep window for our child, which, I talk to so many families that are, my child's just wide awake. It's 8:39 p.m. and they are wide awake. They're running around. There's no chance they're tired. My guess is usually, well, we probably missed the sleep window. They probably were tired earlier, but then what happens is they get a boost of cortisol in their brain, and now they're not tired anymore. Just like we as adults, I could be watching a TV show where, oh, I just need to send a few more emails. I'm really tired, but I'm going to push through. And then all of a sudden, I can't go to sleep anymore because I'm wide awake. So it's the same thing for our children. If we're missing that wake window, it's a lot harder to get them, or if we're missing their tired, the window of them being tired, it's a lot harder to get them to sleep. So that's kind of where we start.
Yeah, I definitely, like that second wind kind of feeling of, if we miss that
Yeah.
window, we definitely realize like a shift in Rosie's kind of mood, and she gets a lot cranky, and then it's a lot of like, no, like I don't want to go to bed, like that kind of stuff. And it's
Yeah,
a lot
definitely.
harder. Like she gets that fight in her. She wants to run up and down the hallway, and we're kind of like, oh no, like we missed that window. So I can definitely, yeah, relate to that kind of feeling, and that makes sense. Like just shifting your schedule. Maybe that's what the issue is, or you're trying to keep them up later, thinking like, oh, if I keep them up late, then they'll be exhausted, and then they'll really go to bed. But you know, we have always tried to kind of do the lay in bed still kind of awake but like ready for bed.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people miss, sometimes, because it's hard, is putting our children or our babies in their crib or bed when they're tired but not asleep yet. Because if you think of it, if your baby falls asleep while you're holding them, and then you carefully tiptoe and creep them in their crib and creep it and leave the room, all of a sudden, when they wake up and they realize, oh, wait, what happened? I was being held and now I'm just in my crib by myself. That's a really startling thing. Like, think about, if, as adults, again, if you fell asleep in your bedroom, and then all of a sudden you woke up in the kitchen, you'd be like, what is going on? It feels really different and weird, and they don't know how to fall asleep on their own. And so that's something that, I always work with my clients as well, on really empowering the parents to give their child the time and space to fall asleep independently. And again, it varies what you do based on age. So much, especially with babies, based on their age is important, but we want them to really, not associate sleep with being held or being fed. They call that a sleep prop. So a sleep prop is like falling asleep while being held, bed, in the stroller, in the car seat, with a pacifier. Those are all things that make it easier for them to fall asleep. But then when that doesn't exist, it's a lot harder for them to fall asleep.
Okay, so you mentioned, like the pacifier. Is that something that you help? Like maybe like Rosie still uses the pacifier right now. She's 1.5. We do plan on like transitioning past that. But, I'm sure that that's probably a common thing, that now you take the pacifier away and their sleep habit is completely different. So is that something like maybe a parent is reaching out to you, like, we took the pacifier away, they're not sleeping, help us?
Yes, definitely. So typically it just takes some adjusting time to do that. And it's so funny because so many families will be like, "Well, they sleep at daycare without the pacifier, but then they get home and they can't do it." And a lot of it's we have to give them the time and space to try. They can do it. We just have to help teach them how. So, of course, night 1, they're not going to, if we take away their pacifier or we move them from the crib to the bed, of course, they're not going to magically, there are exceptions, but they're not going to magically sleep perfectly throughout the night because we've changed a major part of their sleep routine. And they now, the pacifier is soothing. It's that suckling feeling. But a lot of the times, as a child gets a little older, that pacifier starts to impact their sleep because, it starts to fall out of their mouth and they can't find it. So then, families are putting like 5 or 6 pacifiers around the bed, or in the crib so they can find a new one. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, we did that for sure.
yeah. Totally. So there comes a point where it starts to impact them negatively, and then it's time to give it away. And I like to say, like, let's give it away, or have the pacifier fairy come and, give a little bit of warning, but not too much to your child. If they're, a little bit older, let them know, and we're going to say goodbye to them. And then really the biggest culprit is you have to make sure you've gotten all of the pacifiers because you want to clear them, say goodbye to them. And I had a client that found literally like 3.5 weeks after we'd worked together, she found one pacifier that her little one had been hiding and using at night. So we want to make sure that we really get all of them cleared because we don't want to have to redo the work we've put in. So, again, a lot of parents that contact me, even if the pacifier is not impacting sleep, I say, you know what, while we're working together, it's your choice as a parent, but I recommend let's again eliminate all the variables we can control. That might be something that's impacting their sleep. We want them to be able to do it on their own independently eventually. And again, all children are different and all families are different. And another thing that I think is so crucial is that as parents are choosing to reach out to a specialist, it's really important that they find someone that they feel comfortable with because there are so many different consultants that have different methods and different ways of doing things. A parent knows their child better than I ever could. So even though I specialize in sleep, you as a mom or a dad or, a parent knows your child at the core. So you have to find someone who you feel comfortable with. And if something doesn't feel right, you have to say, you know what, that doesn't feel comfortable for my family or my child. I don't think that's going to work. And you want your consultant to be able to say, okay, then let's do it this way then. I think that's so important because it's a working relationship. And, as a parent, you're constantly the advocate for your child as they go into school or go to the doctor or, with a sleep consultant or whomever. It's really important that the parents have that voice and it's a working relationship. So I always tell people to really look for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's so good to, be able to give that parent the voice, or be open to, if they're like, oh, that's not going to work for us, it's like, okay, well, let's see what can work for you, and be accommodating for those kinds of things, because I'm sure like that would make me feel so much better, like, wow, like she understands me and she wants to, work around things that make sense to me or things that I want for my child. And I think that's a big part of, parenting, and feeling like you do have that advocacy for your children, and what you want for them. So that's awesome that like you're able to provide that for families.
Definitely.
And then, so you said making the room dark, cool and the sound. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So we want to kind of make the room like a cave. So we want it to be a little cool, and they're not going to freeze. They have either, their sleep sack on, their pajamas. When they get to a certain age, they can have a blanket. But we want to make sure that the room isn't too hot because we're biologically programmed to feel more tired when the room is cool and when it's dark. And like when I say dark, I'm talking dark. We want it in the middle of the day when the shades are closed and the door is shut and the lights are off. We want it to be quite dark. So much so that, for example, if a child is now in their bed or you're transitioning from crib to bed, we want it to be a little challenging to get out of bed because we want them to look around and say, huh, it's kind of dark. I can't really get out of this bed. I can't really see to do so. Not in a dangerous way because we've looked at the room and we've said, okay, we shouldn't put this sharp dresser right next to their head. Let's give it a little bit of space. So if they do sit up and try to get out of bed, they can safely, but we want it to be dark because that helps them to fall asleep. And there's a lot of little electronics that emit light. I know Nests are super popular right now, or um, you know, Amazon has different devices and all of these different devices, which can be great. But I really recommend starting at, a completely dark room. Some toddlers really fixate on light or a night light or a little light being on. And again, most of the time, giving the toddler a couple days, they adjust to it, and the darkness really helps their sleep because they're falling asleep in the dark. And then when they wake up and it's still dark in their room, they understand it's still time for bed and it's still time for sleep, and it's easier to fall back asleep. And then I also recommend getting a quality white noise machine. That we want the volume to be high enough where, if someone's in the kitchen and accidentally drops, a pan, it doesn't wake up the baby or the toddler. Or if we're, in the living room having a conversation or watching TV, we don't want it to wake the baby or the child. So a lot of the times the white noise machine isn't turned up enough. So we want to make sure it's loud enough. Um, I recommend starting with white and pink noise, to try that first, and give your child some time to adjust, especially if it's something new. A lot of toddlers prefer like the lullabies or something a little different. I just always recommend start with the white noise. It's simple, it's not stimulating to the brain, and it just is really good at getting rid of outside of the room noises. So I say start there. And if it's a little bit of an older child, sometimes having a little bit of control does help. So if it's 2.5, 3-year old, we might want to say, okay, you get to choose the sound for tonight. But if, before bed, the child might say, oh, now I don't like this noise. Well, now's not the time to change our noise. Tomorrow you can pick a new sound before, bath time. But we're sticking with this noise for tonight because it can kind of become a tactic that they might use to try to stay up or get a little extra time. So we want to really be cognizant of that because our little ones are little geniuses and know exactly what to do and ask of us to get a little extra time and attention.
Mm-hmm. And so you said white noise and pink noise? What is pink noise?
Yeah. Pink noises are just a little like softer. They have some of the settings, and I believe on the Nest they have like a pink noise setting. It's just like a slightly different like whoosh sound.
Yeah, yeah, I've never heard of that. I'll have to check that out. That's real interesting. And then, so I have kind of, I guess, like been told, or it's been like passed down and stuff of like, try to make the most noise possible, like when the baby's first trying to sleep, because if they can sleep through that, then they can sleep through anything. Is that true? Is that helpful? Is that.
I mean, yeah, it to an extent, it's definitely, it's something to try. But again, each child is so different that sometimes you just can't change the child. Like, it's sometimes just in the bricks of your child. So, some people are more sensitive to sound and noise than others. You can certainly try to do that, but ultimately, we want them to get like quality deep sleep, and that's the most important. So to new moms, I would definitely say, don't put too much effort into like making noise. If your child's taking a nap and they're falling asleep, excellent, take a nap yourself, or get a cup of coffee for yourself. Don't feel like you have to run around with a vacuum and bang things around. They will sleep. Sleep is biologically required for us to survive. So our child has to eat, drink, and sleep to survive. So your child will get sleep. So, if you need to take a break and put your feet up, for all means, take a break and put your feet up.
Yeah. And then I guess, like, do you work with specific scheduling? Like, if they want to, bedtimes at 7 o'clock, is that something that you can help them shift to be at that time, or work with specific scheduling, or what does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. There are some families that, the parents just cannot do early mornings. So we might try a little bit of a tiny bit of a later bedtime. However, sometimes if you go too late with your bedtime, it's counterintuitive and your child ends up waking up earlier. So I always recommend, if you're looking at adjusting bedtime, to try to adjust in 15-minute increments over a few days and let your child adjust to that 15 minutes and then move 15 more minutes again. Anything greater than that is too big of a change for their body. So even things like daylight savings, a week before, just slowly start to adjust 15 minutes earlier or later, depending on which one it is, and let your child adjust so it's not this like huge shock when it's daylight savings. So same with bedtime. Most of the clients that I work with are actually usually putting their child to bed much too late, and again, they're missing that sleep window and their child's getting really crazy at night. And then they're also waking up multiple times in the night. And then they're waking up early on top of that. And then they end up napping, at daycare or during the day for a lot longer than they probably should, because they're trying to make up for the sleep they're not getting at night. So, I always talk about bedtime sleep improves first. So, falling asleep, going to sleep, shortening the length it takes for a child to fall asleep is what's going to fix first. Middle of the night wake ups will fix next. And then the final phase is those early morning wake ups will start to correct. But, it's a process and it's building blocks. So, as we're teaching our children to fall asleep on their own, those middle of the night wake ups will slowly start to fix. And actually, the client that I'm working with right now has a 3.5-year-old, and last night was the first night, fell asleep on her own in her room, no issues, didn't come out, didn't call for mom, slept 100% through the night, and woke up 7 a.m. So she slept her 7:15 to 7 a.m., just solid through the night. So it can happen. And this child was falling asleep, watching TV or in mom's bed, or needed mom in her room with her. And, multiple times a night she would wake up, or mom would carry her from her bed into her room, and then she would end up back in bed. So, it took 6 days, and, she is consistently sleeping on her own through the night. And her behavior's improved, and the mom's like, "Oh my gosh, I have so much more energy, and I want to do more with her during the day because I have more energy to do so." So it is possible, even when it seems like it's not. It is possible.
Yeah. And then how much of an impact, I guess, would like a bedtime routine have? Do you go into bedtime routine? Like, how much does that affect what's actually happening at night?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that. A bedtime routine is really important because if you think about it, our little ones really have no control over their life, right? So they might know, okay, I go to daycare and then some days I stay home, or they understand that, but they don't get to really choose what they do with their day, or how. So it's really important that we create some predictability so they understand and feel more in control of their life. They have grown-ups telling them, here's what we're doing all times of the day. So it's really nice for them to know, okay, we eat dinner, we play, quietly play, read books, take a bath, and then we'll read 2 books before bed, and then it's time to go to bed. We always read in this chair, and then, we go and of course, sometimes we're gonna be flexible with that. Sometimes it's not possible to get our child to bed at 7 every night, grandparents are in town, or there's an event that we're going to, or, you know, we're having a babysitter come over. So, of course, there's going to be some flexibility in that, but we want it to feel like muscle memory for them. So we want them to know after dinner, it's this, and bedtime. So their bodies can slowly adjust. And as we're going through those steps, they're actually getting tired because their body knows that bedtime is coming. So the routine really does help. To really solidify. Another thing I like to talk about is bedtime books versus dramatic books. So there is a reading books and teaching the love of books is different than bedtime books. Our bedtime stories are meant to be calming, really quiet. We want them slower paced. We want them to not be overly engaging. So, those amazing, wonderful interactive books, or books that have the buttons of sounds, or that book, the push book, where you push the paint dot and then it's like 100 paint dots in different colors and it turns red and blue. That's an amazing book, but not for bedtime. So I always recommend have a pile of bedtime books or a shelf that's bedtime. And those we're going to read in a calm, slow, quiet voice. Like those apps that adults sometimes listen to fall asleep, and the voice is like so monotone and quiet. We want to do that for our children at bedtime versus dramatic books where we're asking questions and we're doing voices and we're being silly and we're predicting what might happen in the book, or pointing out, oh, let's count how many birds are on this page. So that's fabulous. And we want to do that kind of reading too, just not at bedtime. Same with as our children are getting older and practicing reading themselves, the time for them to practice reading is not right before bed. They're physically tired, their brains are tired and need to start shutting down, not powering up. That's too stimulating before bed. And it can actually be quite frustrating because I know when I'm tired, my brain is not operating at 100%. So those kind of books are best suited for before bed. So in the schedule that I work out with the family, I always say before dinner time is time for screens, if your family does screens, and dramatic book reading. Anytime after dinner time, we want it to be calmer, quiet. Like if you have extra time to fill, do some coloring or do something relaxing like working on a puzzle. It's not the time to like play fire truck and dress up and go crazy. So, really looking at the timing of that in the routine will set your child up for success.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have any specific books, I guess, like off the top of your head that you typically recommend for like a bedtime story?
Yeah. So I love the good old classic Goodnight Moon. I mean, I can remember falling asleep to that. And even if you look at that book, you can see the pages, like the artwork of the pages slowly getting darker and dimmer. So that's an excellent bedtime book. It's repetitive, and it rhymes, but not in a like upbeat sing song kind of way. It's like a mellow, slow, calm rhyming. Same with Time for Bed by Mem Fox. I love that book with the different animals and, showing them all going to sleep. And again, it's talking about sleep. But again, like that would be a great book to practice animal sounds, just not before bed. That would be a great activity before dinner to practice the different animals and pointing them out and learning their names or doing the sounds. But you can also use that book for bedtime. Just take out, the interactive part of it and really just read slow and, and calmly. I also love this book. It's called Sweet Dreams, Shrinking Down, and it's by Miriam Gates. It's talking about like shrinking and letting your body. It kind of talks through the different body parts and relaxing them. It's almost like a beginning meditation book for our little ones, which is really cool. Um, so I really like that one. Um, and gosh, one more. Tomorrow I'll Be Brave by Jessica Hish is a really fun book too. So a lot of those bedtime books do take place at night. The pages are darker, the illustrations are a little calmer. So those are some good like tips and tricks to find some bedtime books. And again, our children like repetition, so we don't need to have 40 bedtime books. They actually learn by that repetition. So having a stack of, 10 or 5 bedtime books that they can choose from is totally fine. And I always say aim for 2 short or 1 long book, no more than that. If they're begging like, "Oh, one more book," you can pick out 1 more book and we'll read it tomorrow morning. We'll put it right here on your dresser, and first thing tomorrow morning when it's time to wake up, we'll read that book. But it's really important to not give that extra time at bedtime because again, the goal of bedtime is to go to sleep. They don't need anything else but sleep at bedtime. So, it's really important to stick to that. 2 short, 1 long, or whatever your family decides. But I like to recommend from the time, after bath, you brush teeth, you try the restroom if they're potty trained. Um, get lotion on, those things. But by the time you sit in the chair to read, that should, and say goodnight and leave the room, that should be under 10 minutes total. So, we're looking at reading the 2 short, 1 long, rocking and snuggling for a moment, putting them into bed, telling them how wonderful they are, how much you love them, maybe something you're grateful for, or, some people do a prayer, whatever your nighttime routine is. Kiss them, pet their back for a moment, and then leave the room, is the goal. And we want to keep it under that 10-minute mark because anything longer than that, again, gets a little stimulating for them and it makes it a lot harder for them to fall asleep by themselves.
And then I guess, so you said that you typically work with like a year and older, and there's definitely, infant sleep consultants and such. But I guess like at that year mark then, or what knowledge do you have before then of how long they should be sleeping or what's abnormal or when should they consider kind of reaching out for help? Like I know some moms are maybe still waking up in the middle of the night and things like that, and they're fine with it and they're okay that that's like happening and occurring. Where does that, I guess, affect development, or what's a good kind of range, or where should we be focusing on, like how many hours, or is there a benchmark to kind of refer to?
Yeah, definitely. So, the National Sleep Foundation recommends you can look there or the CDC, and they have charts and recommendations, but they recommend a newborn, 0 to 3 months is sleeping 14 to 17 hours. And they're looking at sleep in a 24-hour period. So that includes their naps. Same with an infant, 4 to 11 months is getting 12 to 15 hours. A toddler that's 1 to 2 years is getting 11 to 14 hours. And preschool age 3 to 5 is getting 10 to 13. And school range 6 to 13 is getting 9 to 11. And again, it will, it'll vary because sometimes, as our child's body is growing or preparing to have a growth spurt, they need more food and sleep. Or if they're sick, they're going to need more sleep. So Things like that, definitely, or if they've had a really stimulating or emotional day, or, they've just been on vacation and now they're getting home. Those are all things that can impact their sleep. Um, Typically, a child is ready to stop feeding throughout the night between 4 and 6 months. But again, that's another thing that should be worked out between the family and their pediatrician. So before, a child's getting weaned from night feedings, I always recommend that parents check with their pediatrician. So before I start time with any client, I say, let's double check, just touch base with your pediatrician, make sure they don't have any concerns about anything, because again, they know your child better than I can coming in as a consultant. And they're also a trained medical professional, which I am not. So it's really important to get that input first and make sure, and then you can move forward. And then as a child is getting going from feeding throughout the night to then weaning off of that, you typically see their sleep start to really, improve, and they can go longer stretches. But again, it's an adjustment, and it often feels like, oh my gosh, this doesn't feel right. They're crying. And, we have to remember that babies cry and children and toddlers cry to communicate. So, um, it doesn't always necessarily mean that we're doing something wrong or they need something. There are want-based cries that happen as well. So that's something that I work on the phone with my clients. So I actually, as we work together the first few nights, I say, grab your earbuds, grab your phone, let's set up on FaceTime. If you have a monitor, set the phone up so I can watch the monitor with you, and let's listen to the cry that they're crying. Because being a mom, Rosie has different types of cries. There's the cry that, oh my gosh, something is wrong, the hairs are standing up on my arms, she is hurt, I'm like sprinting to her. There's the cry that's like, I'm bored, or I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or I'm mad. They get that behavioral, like, I don't want to be doing this cry. And a lot of the times we get their cries confused. And again, that's why I always recommend, if bedtime feels like something you dread, or your partner dreads, or your child dreads, reach out to a specialist. You don't have to do it alone. If we have an issue with our plumbing, we call a plumber. If we don't know about something with, our child being sick, we call the doctor. So call a specialist. We don't have to have all of the answers as a parent, but, knowing where to find them and reach out for help is excellent. Sleep should be something that feels enjoyable. Bedtime should be a memorable, comfortable bonding moment for a family. And if, as a parent, you find yourself saying, oh my God, it's almost bedtime, like, I can't deal, or I need a moment because bedtime's so stressful, or they get so upset, or it takes so long. It doesn't have to be hard, and it doesn't need to take more than 10 minutes. And I have so many incredible parents that are sitting with their children for hours trying to get them to fall asleep. And, it's just so hard as a parent, because again, you want to do the best thing for your child, and that they need sleep. However, you also need to, give yourself some care. And, if you have a partner, have that time for, as grown-ups, or if you have an older child, have time for the older child. So, um, you know, reach out for help if you dread bedtime. It doesn't have to be hard.
So, with that, where can we start looking for help? Like, what would be a good resource of finding a sleep consultant in our area? Or, can you give us all your information, how we can contact you, things like that?
Yeah. So, you can find a local person. You can start, I recommend starting with the Association of Professional Sleep Consultants. So, I am recognized by that association, as are a lot of great sleep coaches. Also, word of mouth. Ask your friends if they've worked with anyone that they like. And again, it's really important to find the right fit for your family. So call, do a little research on different people and have a call with a couple of them and see who feels right to work with, and who you want to talk to, and what you feel like you need for support. So if people want more information about me, I have an Instagram and a Facebook, and it's at Tiny Duck Parenting. And my website's, www.tinyduckparenting.com. And I offer 10 days of unlimited 24-hour coaching. So I, a lot of consultants, which, is fine. Again, you have to know what will I benefit from as a parent. Some consultants say, okay, let's touch base in the morning or via email. Here's what you're going to do tonight. And then let's check in tomorrow and let me know how it goes. I like to, do a little more hands-on, because especially the first few nights can be really emotional. I mean, I've sat on the phone while, parents cry because it's such a release, and it's hard to see your child learning something new. And this really is one of the first things they learn. So, I will be available to my clients 24 hours a day. So if we will coach through bedtime as it happens. We talk ahead of time. Here's our plan. Here's your materials. Here's the routine. This is what we're going to do. Text me when you're starting to read books. And then the second you leave the room, give me a call, and we will, in real time, I will be coaching you so you can stay calm in your body as a parent and not get stressed or overwhelmed. And if you are stressed or overwhelmed, share it with me and let me be there to support you. So then you can be there to support your child as they're learning this new skill. So that also counts for, I have clients that sometimes call me at 2 or 3 a.m. because their child's waking up and what we had discussed isn't working. And I would much rather talk to a client at 3 a.m. for 10 or 15 minutes, quickly, go through our game plan or make an adjustment, than say, let's touch base tomorrow morning. And, you went through, this horrible night and didn't know what to do, because we want to make it as easy on the child as possible. And that means we want to do it efficiently and effectively, and with them in mind. And so if that means I want to talk to a client needs to talk to me at 3 a.m., awesome. Let's talk, let's solve it, so we get your child back in bed and we don't have to take a back step for the next day. And then now the next day is harder. So I find that really works. And typically, I mean, I've worked with people that are, using melatonin, iPads, TV, anything like presents, prizes, anything to get their child to sleep. And truly, most of my clients, by night 4, their child's falling asleep independently. The night wakings are starting to go away, and, they're sleeping to a reasonable time in the morning. So, those early wake ups are starting to dissipate as well. So it is possible, and bedtime doesn't have to feel awful. It can be really enjoyable. And the nice part is that, if you people that have multiple children can do it all at once. It's possible, to make those changes for the whole family. And it's so funny. My favorite thing to ask my clients is, so what are you going to do tonight? Like, you have the whole night. It's 7 o'clock or it's 8 o'clock. Your child's asleep, not going to wake up. And they're like, oh my God, we're going to watch a movie. I had a client go, oh my gosh, have you seen the movie The Greatest Showman? It's so good. And I was like, yeah, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, or, 4 years ago, it came out. So I saw it then, but it's so fun to be able to see parents have that success, and then to have them be able to watch their child succeed in that way is really exciting.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's something that a lot of people don't realize. You get that question early in motherhood of, oh, is the baby sleeping through the night? Like, how's that going? And like, that's great and everything, but it's more so, how are you sleeping through the night? What are you doing? And when your child is getting those benefits and having that routine and having that schedule, you get your nights back. I hear so many people, oh, wake up a half an hour before your kids so that you can have time to yourself. And people are like, oh my gosh, like, how could I possibly wake up a half an hour before them? They're not even sleeping through the night. We were up at 4 a.m., like this, that. Like, when your child is sleeping more efficiently and through the night, you get that time back to yourself. And I think that's what's really important too. Like, you get the recharge, you get to wake up a little bit early and not be, instantly having to tend to your children. You get that little extra time right before bed to maybe journal or read or do whatever you want to do to create a bedtime routine for yourself. So I think, we don't really sometimes comprehend the full benefit of our children sleeping, and we don't see it as something that's going to help us as well. We want to care for our kids, we want to give them the best, but we also need to fill up our own cup, and we need to like recharge ourselves so that we can be fully there. So I think, that's a huge benefit of what you do too. And I think the add on 24/7 contact of that emotional side of what's going on. Like, there were nights, yeah, that Rosie wouldn't sleep or something was going on, or she'd be crying when she was teething and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing wrong? What's going on? And if I could have had somebody to call at that 2 a.m., 4 a.m. time to just vent, that's huge. Like,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And you always feel like, I don't want to call a friend or, somebody else because I'm going to burden them, or it's too late, or it's this, or, even like your partner might have work the next day, you have work the next day, dealing with all of those factors and being able to have somebody who is going to guide you through that, emotionally calm you down, let you know this is normal, this is okay, let's adjust, and have an action plan in place right then and there. And you're not worrying all night or, oh, what am I going to do? Who am I supposed to contact? I think that's such a huge extra added bonus that you offer. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and it really is because our bodies are actually biologically programmed to respond to our children crying. That's why when we were cavemen, we didn't just say like, "Oh, this is hard," and like leave our child. We are wanting to respond to their crying to get them to calm down because our bodies, although we don't live as cavemen anymore, we're that cry makes us somewhere biologically think there is a threat. A predator is going to hear this baby. I have to get it to calm down. Now we live in homes and apartments, and we don't have to worry about predators in that way. But our bodies are still wired. So having that third party on the phone to say, take a deep breath, release your jaw, roll your shoulders, have a sip of water, it's okay. That's not an I need you cry. That's an I'm angry cry. I don't like this. This is different. So having that person on your team and helping, I mean, why not make your life a little bit easier, because it doesn't have to be hard in this category. Parenting is too hard to not use the resources out there if you can. Um, and there are a lot of great blogs, and I leave tips and tricks on my Facebook and Instagram. And it's so important to reach out to people who really have the experience that can help guide you. And more importantly, we want to teach our children that self care, and some independence too, because we're not going to always be able to help them fall asleep after a bad dream, especially if you have multiple children. Then you have to really, like, it's a fine balancing act of managing all of the children, their needs, the household needs, your work needs, your friends, your personal needs. So we start to teach self-care at a young age. And that's something too, I say, like, think about ways you can celebrate your child's success when they sleep through the night for the first time. Have a parade, teach them to have a bubble bath, get manicures, or, go get some, like, have breakfast for dinner, get ice cream, or, go on a walk around the block and pick flowers for yourself, find ways to teach them some of that self-care and celebration for themselves. It's really, really exciting when we see our children succeed and do something and accomplish something. And I had a client's little one say, "I'm so proud of myself" at breakfast. And, we both just burst into tears. We're like, this is so beautiful. And she understands that she just had a really challenging situation and she was able to do it. And she was able to find that in herself and empower herself to fall asleep. So, that's a really big accomplishment for our little ones. And we want to be there to help facilitate their success, and hold their hand and help them through it, but not do it for them all the time. So, it's really an important skill. And, the children that can fall asleep independently can work on doing other things independently. So, it's really great, and it really does expand well beyond just bedtime and sleep.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for really explaining all of this and diving into like where we can kind of start and what things look like and little helpful tips and where we can reach you and everything. So, just I appreciate this time so much and what you're able to share with us. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And it was so great to talk to you.
Well, this wraps up yet another episode of Entering Motherhood. I hope that you have found this episode helpful, and if you liked it, please share it with others who might also benefit from this information. If there's anything that you'd like to know more about, or maybe you know someone who'd like to be on the show, please visit my website, enteringmotherhood.com. I'm so thrilled to be going on this journey with you and getting the amazing opportunity to help moms during this postpartum experience. You can also now find us on Instagram and Facebook at Entering Motherhood.